and time again, government agencies reach past their limits when it comes to controlling and managing natural resources and the land that farmers work so hard to keep. In the discussion today, I hope we can come to prove that it is not external government agencies that have a place in this management plan, but it is agriculturalists and farmers themselves who work so hard to keep this land the way it is.
Natural resources are ingredients a farmer's land can't live without. After years of onerous rules and regulations by an overreaching government, the American farmer has seen their management decisions usurped by an overreaching government. Along with the Farm Bureau, farmers and ranchers should collect and assemble a common sense and intellectual model via public media to illustrate demonstrate how farmers use a sustainable method of management practices that is both mutually beneficial for their family and their farms.
I, as a Farm Bureau member, do not believe in government regulations and government policies. I believe if we follow our sound science and practices that we have been instructed through our different organizations, through collegiate and our extension agents, we're doing just fine. Our farmers and ranchers are born and bred to handle and take care of our Mother Earth and our natural resources of water, air, and soil. I think if we stay with following of the sound science, we're going to be perfectly well with handling this and not be interrupted by the government and different regulations.
In my home state of West Virginia, part of our national conscience is the Hatfield and McCoy feud, where two families were locked in a bitter struggle over dwindling natural resources they depended on to survive and thrive. Last year, the eyes of the nation were turned to a small wildlife refuge in Oregon, where ranchers and farmers led by the Bundys were locked in a standoff with federal authorities. Reaching these crisis proportions, it's time for Farm Bureau to spearhead a discussion over the control and use of our natural resources for the benefit of agriculture.
You have heard the opening statements. Competitors, please direct your open discussion to your fellow panel members.
A few weeks ago, before hunting season, a friend of mine, we were riding around scouting for bucks, and I asked him the question. He had a farm that he had just purchased, he's full-time. And I said, Quill, as a farmer, what natural resources concern you? He goes, well, you got your coal, then you got your oil and gas, and then your timber, then your grass and soil and water. And I said, in that order? He said, well, kind of, as it profits me. But I said, what's the most important that concerns you about someone else trying to control that? He goes, water, number one thing. So we're coming from all different sides of the country here, and I was thinking maybe we could just talk about what are the important resources in your states for your farmers.
Water is, where I'm from, water is just the number one limiting factor in our farming community. We're all dependent on irrigation. We get, our rainfall amounts vary from 20 inches a year to this year we had less than 10, and a massive heat wave. And there's a lot of different farming operations that practice sustainable irrigation practices where they try to not pump too much, as they can, and others that just overuse the system and dwindle our underground water table. And so one of the things I've been promoting as an advocate, is what kind of the term's been, is going through the blogosphere and public media to get the news out to the millennials such as ourselves, because they're now controlling the social platform of how these ideas get out. And I think if we can just collect some kind of a model, and starting like with the water issue you brought up, how important water is. You can't do anything without water. And out here in Phoenix and Las Vegas, where all these large municipalities are using water, they really don't understand how if farmers lose it first, they have nothing to eat. So that's a really good point that you brought up.
Brent, if I could jump in, because you said something very crucial. If farmers don't get it, then we're at a total loss. And coming from central Colorado, there are so many external states around that rely on the sources of water from our state and from the mountains. And what we're fighting along the Front Range is an increasing population that's taking most of those water rights and the use of this water. And we're not only losing them in the eastern plains of our state and the western slope, but the external states
eventually are gonna lose availability of water as well. And you also brought up millennials kind of fighting against us, and correct me if I'm wrong when it comes to issues like this, but being a millennial myself and standing in a university where I see issues like this talked about all the time, we're constantly, you're right, we're constantly outnumbered by that age group of people, but I am in that age group of people, and it's hard for me to take a stand and find a way to combat those against us. But I think through social media, like you said in your opening statement, is a good direction to go in. Another thing that Farm Bureau does in Colorado is we make future plans, because everything's about conserving and saving water as a natural resource, because though it falls from the sky, it is limited to an extent. And Farm Bureau's working to make a plan to create more reservoirs, create more processing plants, so we can utilize this water better and balance the needs of the urban and the agricultural communities. And I think that's the key point that we need to kind of look at when it comes to water, is balancing those needs.
I think it's interesting that we're focusing on just water, and don't get me wrong, I love good, clean, fresh water for both myself and livestock. But trying to pick out which natural resource is one we need to focus on the most is really challenging for me. Even within my state boundaries, what I worry about for water in my area, which at any moment in a year, we're 2 weeks away from a drought, versus what our western part of my state is gonna worry about for their natural resource priority list is gonna be totally different. I think we need to focus on a broad spectrum of just natural resources, and where does Farm Bureau stand with that? How can we get the government to give up more control of their lands that they've been wanting to buy more and more of, and outside interest groups wanting to buy more and more land, and leave it for the private sector to follow the sound science that our educational systems, our universities, our extension agents have taught us how sound science works. Our farmers and ranchers want all natural resources to stand the test of time. We're drinking that same water. We're not gonna put a bunch of chemical on there. We're gonna need to use that soil 2 generations from now, so we're not gonna wanna take all the nutrients out of it. We need coal. We're one of the biggest states when it comes to coal-powered energy, and we have very clean air. So just focusing on water is something I think we need to diversify from, and I'd like to hear what your guys' thoughts are on just natural resources as a whole.
Yeah, and that goes back to our main question. As far as solving the problem and the question we're trying to answer, I think the Farm Bureau, and talk about millennials, I'm kind of a Generation XY squared age. I don't know which one I'm in. Anyway, I think you're right. Yeah, water's the most important, but it's really correct that all our natural resources should be put on a platform. And I'm saying billboards, social media, of course, is a big one. But we have to make a big collective effort to get the truth out there, because that's one of the biggest things. I talk about going to social media and just the internet in general, but that's a dangerous place at the same time, because you have to dispel all these myths and all the lies about what farmers do. And I think the most encouraging and promising aspect we can push is how farmers are sustainable and how they promote a mutually beneficial farming operation that helps to supply the American food supply with a safe food supply. Being a producer myself, we're in a no-till operation where we don't do any plowing. We hadn't done that in about a decade. And I've really tried to promote it, and there's still a lot of pushback in our area, but for myself and our operation, that's one thing we've really tried to push, is a no-till operation that promotes sustainability and uses less natural resources. So I think if we can get that kind of program, not just our program, but anybody's sustainable program, out into the public media aspect of the greater country, that would be a good solution to our problem.
Brent, I absolutely agree with you. Good press is always good for the agricultural industry, and especially if we direct it to those who are not educated on the industry, and sometimes I think that's the hardest part. But like you said, Rocky, when you look at natural resources as a whole, not just water, we can't just change how the government's interfering with our management practices by having good press and educating the public. This is a full front with Farm Bureau and our lobbyists sitting down with the future administration, because though they say the future Trump administration is going to support the drilling of natural resources and everything else we'd like to hear, we still don't know if that's going to happen. The battle's far from over, and we need to have a seat at the table when it comes to talking to many of these politicians that are in the end going to be approving much of this policy that can restrict us or help us. And I think it's important to understand that we're not going to totally get the government out of our business. We don't live in a day and age where that's going to happen. but we need to push as far as we possibly can, and I think it's very possible for many different things.
I think you're 100% correct on that, and that to me seems more like a short-term fix, dealing with the government, but our biggest issue is the public. We're fighting a lot of ignorance. Just recently, we have, if you're paying attention to North Dakota at all, we have a lot of protesting going on, and we had an out-of-state interest group coming in, and they blamed the government, North Dakota and the government, for the snowstorm that we had come across our state, trying to get them to move out. I mean, that's the ignorance we're having to face. So just dealing with the government isn't gonna fix our ignorance, it's gonna fix some rules and some regulations and some policies. I think we need to really get into our school systems and get into face-to-face education. So, yeah, we're not gonna have that immediate fix, but we're gonna fix the next generation and the generation thereafter that by educating them and not focusing on the schools that already have great ag programs or great natural resource type classes offered. We need to get into the inner city type class or schools and focus on that education so they truly realize what's happening and not just believing what's on that social media. To fix the immediate problem is get into the lobbyists and visit with them and try to get some rules changed. But if there's a group of ignorant people out there that really want to make a change, they're gonna do the same thing, and they're gonna get a big group of people together and a bunch more money than we can probably even think of to fight against us with those same lobbyists and those same congressmen. So we need to educate the people, the grassroots people, before we just put all of our eggs in the basket of the government.
I'm gonna agree with you on some of those points, Rocky, and I'm gonna disagree with you. A lot of times, yes, ignorance has more to do with the pushback against our efforts than good science. A lot of times myths take over. But I'm going to disagree with you and say that we can affect direct relationships with our government, especially with our elected officials at the state level. And here's why. I was talking to our state senator about a week ago about this very question. And I asked him directly, I said, how much do your colleagues in the Senate, how much do the people in the House of Delegates, how much do they actually know about water quality issues? And he goes, nothing. He goes, very poor amount of education on their part. He said they don't know a parts per million from a hole in the ground, let's say. It's not exactly what he said, but he said that's why Farm Bureau has a very effective policy directly reaching and educating these people. In West Virginia, our policy book is in every desk in the state capitol. Whenever there's a new session, our Farm Bureau is there handing out directly to legislators and senators copies of our book. Okay, they might not read it right away, but the senator said whenever an issue comes up where Farm Bureau has a stake in the game or has a policy, they can open it. The Sierra Club manual isn't in there, but ours is. That's a powerful tool. The other thing is not just relying on our lobbyists. We have one, you could call him a lobbyist in West Virginia, and a very great guy, very low-key, very approachable. He's here this week, and his title's government relations. He's not a lobbyist. He's not, passing checks in the back alley or CD saluting to these guys. What we rely on is our own members, our grassroots members, to get the telephones ringing. Whenever an issue comes up, the senator told me, and my phone isn't ringing, and it's an agriculture issue, he says, I know Farm Bureau's behind it. He said, if it's natural resources or an agriculture issue and our phones are blowing up, we know back off. We better talk to you guys before we move forward on that issue.
Yeah, that's interesting. When I was in college, I was an intern up in DC, and I got to make coffee and do the mail 3 times a day. And every once in a while, our phones would blow up, and it wasn't necessarily the natural resource, but the senior citizen group got a call about Medicare, and they got a massive amount of phone calls into their congressman, and I could not keep up. But anyway, to go back to Rocky's point on education, I know Farm Bureau is really pushing ag in the classroom. I know my brother, they just had an ag in the classroom day back in our hometown, and brought all these kids in to show them how cattle are milked, where their beef comes from. And I really love what Rocky said, because you get that education into those children early, they're going to have a little more know about what's coming from that supermarket. And, if you get them on the right track as to seeing farmers in a positive outlook, I mean, farmers have always kind of had a romantic